Charlie Goodall, Connor Spencer, welcome to the lounge
Howdy.
room. Let's start with you, Charlie. How are you?
Mm. I'm really well, thank you, Tom. Yeah. Nice end to a nice stressful week. Blessed Sunday evening, and ready to talk where the conversation takes us. How are you doing, Tom? All right?
Mate, absolutely wonderful. It's a beautiful sunny morning here. Very, very cool. The weather is beautiful, and no better time to have a chat. And we're
Sure.
lucky enough to be joined by Connor Spencer. Connor, this is your first time in the lounge room. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Couldn't be more excited, and I'm doing very well. Thanks for asking. It is a more dull, chilly, gray day here in the United States, but in Kansas City, we've been having 85-degree days in the middle of October, which is pretty strange for us. So I'm looking forward to some more season-appropriate weather.
Great. Well, let's get down to business. So, Connor, why we are so blessed to have you here is you are in the United States of America, and it seems like all the eyes in the international community are watching what exactly is going on in the US at the moment with the the November 3rd elections coming up.
Pandemonium, as they say. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Craziness.
So let's
I
just
think
start.
that's accurate.
Let's just start big picture. And Connor, what the heck is going on? Paint a bit of a picture. You've got the Democrats and the Republicans. You've got a potentially tumultuous election coming up on November 3rd. Just take a bit of time and walk us through what you're seeing over there.
Sure. So to get the proper context, we kind of have to go back towards there were a number of Englishmen back in 1776 who decided that they were a little bit ticked off with their taxation scheme. One thing led to another, and we have a reality TV show as president facing a fellow who comes across as, I hate to say it, but potentially somewhat cognitively impaired. And yeah, so there's a lot in between there, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So what's going on right
Absolutely.
now? As far as I can tell, you've got so there's a. I'll just get right to it. My thought is that there's been some unrest brewing for a couple years now. Actually, that's not just my thought. I think it's somewhat evident in the public unrest that we've seen and the sort of rhetoric that's bandied about, at least here in the States, and from talking to you briefly so far, sounds like abroad as well, concerning, well, you've got a very polarized body politic right now. Half of the body politic believes that the other half is racist and generally bigoted, and that generally cares a lot more about the, let's say, preservation of non-existent political structures in favor over the development of justice in the actual modern country that we live in. So that's what half the body politic believes the other half believes. And then the other half believes that the original half believes that they're all racist and generally jerks, uneducated, and don't deserve to have a voice in the conversation. And so you get two people who understand, you get two halves of a group of people who understand each other that way, and you end up with a lot of conversations that need to be had, but a bunch of people who are unready to have a real conversation. So a lot of people attribute the election of Donald Trump back in 2016 to this originally, that you had a large swath of the American population that was consistently put down, told that they were racist for not believing certain politics. And so a large part of the working class community that the Democrats have traditionally been able to hold and use as their support base swung to a man who was, while lacking in lacking in decorum, certainly, possibly also lacking in a certain amount of common sense, but he also did not speak to them in a condescending way. He spoke to them in a way that I think made intuitive sense. And so you get that guy in the office, and he's built his tactics for years around shock and awe and manipulating attention, and he's very, very good at it. The joke is here in the States that the Democratic agenda is driven by Donald Trump. It's just the exact opposite of whatever Trump tends to say on a given day, right? So he's masterful at capturing and holding attention. That attention is not always positive, and you've got a group opposing him, let's say the Democratic Party, who has gotten more and more and more worked up by the things that Trump says. And we've gotten to the point where we have a Democratic candidate for office who's threatening to, quote, pack the Supreme Court. And what that means is, so similar to, I believe, the Commonwealth countries, we've got, a system of government that has a certain number of checks and balances, right? In the American system, you've got the executive branch, which is the president and everyone who reports up to the president. And the executive branch is responsible for the enforcement of laws. You've got the legislative branch, which is made up of representatives from every state, which is in charge of creating laws. And then you have the judicial branch, which is supposed to be impartial and separate from the initial two branches, which is supposed to hand down justice impartially of what the political mood may be of the time. However, currently, because there are a number of cases of import of policies that have either been upheld or struck down by Supreme Court fiat in the past couple of years, and that's a whole set of conversations in and of itself. But because you've got that, you now have people in the political arena who have understood that the president, who is allowed to appoint justices for a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court, they've started to understand that one of the most powerful things the president can do is appoint these nominees. And you've gotten more and more rhetoric by presidents and presidential candidates, particularly from Donald Trump. I don't think that Obama really talked much about this, nor any previous president, but Trump has talked a lot about trying to get nominees into the court who would support his policy objectives. Now, a judge committing to that would be a grave violation of judicial ethics and absolutely should not happen. But optically, what people see is that presumably the president is trying to stack the judiciary to be in favor of his policies. Now, the people he's actually put on the court have been supremely qualified, and no one really should have any reason to doubt their impartiality. But Donald Trump, in order to pander to his base, has been talking a whole lot about trying to get justices that would support his agenda. So in response to that, what has happened is the Democrats have figured out that technically the president can expand to the Supreme Court if they desire to. They can appoint a number of justices. And they believe there's a lot of talk in the Democratic Party. So there's one of the biggest issues in front of the Supreme Court that's been debated for years now is that of the decision Roe v. Wade. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Have you heard about that? I don't know. It's a big deal here in the States, but I don't know how well it's known abroad.
Yes, reasonably well. Okay. It's mainly to do with making abortion federally legal. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that the right assessment?
Yeah, right. More to block the states from being able to outlaw abortion.
That's right.
It is right, because plenty of states had legal abortion back in the day. I believe New York being a prime example. But what Roe versus Wade does is it grounds the right to an abortion in the Constitution, and therefore a state cannot withhold that right from people unless you actually amend the Constitution. So there's been debate over Roe versus Wade, both on the premise of, of just the humaneness of the institution of abortion, but also on legal grounds. Ever since it was first put into law, there's been a lot of debate. And one of the things that conservatives in the country have wanted for quite some time, and by conservative I mean conservative in the American political sense, have wanted for quite some time, is to have a court that would be willing to overthrow or overturn Roe versus Wade, because once that happens, then the question of abortion turns to the state and can be determined by state legislatures, because an amendment to the Constitution is nigh on impossible to get through Congress. And so in order to approach it that way, it would take an immense amount of work. Also, well, we can get into the whole argument behind Roe v. Wade, and personally, from an uneducated perspective, it does seem like it's the argument is somewhat suspect. But long and short, the conservatives have been hoping to get enough justices on the court who use a certain approach to their understanding of the Constitution that would allow them to overturn Roe versus Wade if the opportunity arose. The Democrats are wedded to the Roe v. Wade decision and do not want that to be overturned. And so with the appointment of the most recent justice that we've had, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, God rest her soul, she was known as a liberal stalwart of the court. Trump obviously replaced her with a fairly conservative Catholic, actually. Her name's Amy Coney Barrett, a professor at Notre Dame, mother of, I believe, 7 children, of school-age children, also extremely composed under fire. She's really cool, but she's a conservative. So what has happened is the balance of the court, again, in these broad categories, I think it's really dangerous to talk about justices as liberal or conservative, but that's the way that the discussion is going now. And if you look at it that way, the court has been unbalanced in favor of the conservative viewpoint by this appointment. And what that means to the Democrats is one of the sacred cows, one of potentially several sacred cows, but probably the most important being Roe versus Wade, is now threatened. That if there's a challenge to it in the court, there's actually a possibility that it could be overturned, right? And so in order to avoid that, the idea would be the president comes in and appoints. So let's say the balance of the court is like, what is it, 6-3 now? It's either 5-4 or 6-3. So let's say it's 6-3. You want to come in and appoint, let's see,
I think it's a questionable
like 7
6-3.
more justices, right?
Yes, yeah, it's generally
Right,
thought to be 6-3. Yeah, yeah, for conservative, as they say, but yeah.
Right, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, John Roberts, you never really know where he's going to go.
Yeah, he was my questionable 6-3. He always seems to disappoint. Yeah,
he's an interesting guy to follow. I miss Scalia though. He's a good writer. I just picked up a book by his.
Who does?
He's just super entertaining, even if nothing else.
Absolutely.
Anyway. But the idea behind packing the court is they come in and they appoint 7, or actually, I guess they'd only have to appoint maybe 5, but you appoint 5 liberal justices and add them to the court, so that the court, instead of having 9 justices, now has 14. But so actually, you probably want to add 6 to keep from the tie thing. But okay, so you end up with 15 justices on the Supreme Court, which is fine and dandy for the Democrats for 4 years. But then as soon as the Republicans win another election, what's the next thing to do? You can't really remove a justice from Supreme Court with a lifetime appointment. So the Republicans will end up packing the court on their side, and we're just going to end up with a third branch that's more of a legislature than it is a judiciary. Absolutely. And I think that that's a major threat to the balance of the system of checks and balances we've got here in the States. So
justice becomes embarrassing.
Justice becomes a matter of political preference. And it's no longer about the judiciary is supposed to be above and beyond this kind of a thing. But if this can of worms gets cracked, it's not going to stop with this set of appointments, right?
Absolutely.
So it's so we've got more fundamental systemic worries, as well as just the normal political concerns, and add on top of that, we have increased racial tensions in the United States, and add to the top of that that we're in the worst recession since the Great Depression due to shutdowns in reaction to COVID-19. And so you add all of this on top of each other, a bunch of people out of work, frustrated that they can't make money, and with lots of time on their hands, and then add an already immensely charged political atmosphere to that, and you end up with a pretty intense situation, I think would be one way to put it.
Yeah, big headache. All right, I'm going to throw this one at Charlie in a second, but just before I do that, Connor, who do you think is going to win?
Oh,
honestly, well, so I think Donald Trump's going to win. I think that the Democrats haven't learned anything from Donald Trump winning last time, which is put out a candidate that's not boring, so that you actually motivate your people to show up. I think that the people who are interested in Trump are just as interested in showing up this time as they were last time. But I think that Biden is about the most boring candidate that they could have chosen, and Kamala Harris is about the most boring running mate they could have chosen. So I honestly think that they're going to have turnout problems. Now, most of my friends disagree with me very strongly on this. I don't know. You have any thoughts?
Well, the reason I asked you is because our opinions, and I'm sure it's the same with Charlie, and I'm gonna ask Charlie the same question, because our opinions can only be formed on the media that we have exposure to, or conversations we have like this one with people who actually have an up close and relatively personal perspective of what's going on over there. And I would say, if I was to base my opinion on the media that I have available to me, I would say Donald Trump is going to lose in a landslide. But that's how it was in 2016. That's really just doing a balance of the number of what you'd call progressive media outlets versus more conservative media outlets. It's really the trust in the media's ability to accurately depict what is happening has been eroded now for a long time. But if you were to form an opinion based on that, I would say it looks like Donald Trump is going to lose. So, Charlie, what does it look like over in the UK?
Would agree with you.
Yes, as you two will know, that news across the world travels fast. And America tends to dictate the global social milieu and political goings on. So, with that in mind, the news that I've been exposed to has to resonate an opinion that's very similar to what Tom has. That the media would present a Biden landslide. We see that the polling is coming out and putting Biden at a minimum of 6 points ahead, in many polls up to about 11 to 13 points ahead, and that's being just ridden to the sunset by the news outlets out there in the States with their immense global outreach. But I think what we're seeing immensely is a repeat of 2016. I don't think we're seeing much different from then. I think we see a very committed Trump fan. I don't want to use the word fan base. I want to use the word voter base. That's right. So he has a massive committed following, the likes of which that hasn't been seen for a long time. He's a genuine populist, and I think I'd like to see the result I want to predict is, again, a Trump electoral college win, but a popular vote loss. I think we might see a return of that situation, which will certainly not help division in the United States at all with regard to their systemic opinion on the bodies that they're supposed to trust. So yes, I'll have to say that Trump will take the college in 3 weeks' time.
And let's start having this conversation from a different angle, because what's what's so interesting about America is it seems to be, as are all Western countries progressively becoming, politically polarized in terms of progressive left and the conservative right, or the radical right, as some people now term it. Whereas the three of us here, what we have in common is a belief system which allows us not really to be placed in categories of left or right, or if we are placed in a category on the political spectrum, it's by accident more than an actual placement. And that's because we're all Catholics. And so as Catholics, I think these issues are very, very interesting because people, if you talk about ACB, for an example, and people talk about the importance of the impartiality of judges and that judges are there to rule without fear or favour, which they are. That's the role of the judiciary in a democratic system. But really, as Catholics, I'd suggest that we understand or we believe in that the ultimate four causes, life everlasting, God, those are the radical platforms that form all of our decision making. And so there is actually, there's a number of things that have far higher stakes than just conservative and liberal. I believe that we have a very big stake or a very big interest in the decision of Roe and Wade being overturned, abortion being one of the greatest evils ever introduced by man. You've got these issues that go to the core of Catholicism, and you've got these public Catholic personalities who come out and really it looks like they manipulate their Catholicism to garner votes, while really the radical core issues that should be of importance to Catholicism are being left by the wayside. So, Charlie, what are your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. I just want to start by saying that you are indeed correct that there are certain political pundits who are using their Catholicism to garner political support. You're quite right in that. And we see that from Biden, potentially, when he calls himself a lifelong Catholic, but he's very much a man of words and not much of a man of doing, which is a very common theme in this election. We see much rhetoric, but we see very little action. If I had to say what we're seeing from the men of action, it has to be Donald Trump who's winning on that side, and Nancy Pelosi is another one who calls herself a Catholic, but seems to suggest otherwise. We see a fascinating thing with the ongoing Supreme Court hearing with Amy Coney Barrett, ACB, as I shall refer to her as a sort of antidote to the Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who is AOC on the common political airwaves. So ACB, yes, indeed, she has been relentlessly grilled for her Catholic views. Well, I don't even want to call them views. It's her way of thinking and seeing the world, and it's her most sincerely held belief. I don't doubt it for a moment, in the way that she's managed to hold herself in the barrage of questions that she's been asked the past few days. Indeed, and you see that she is the first genuine, dyed-in-the-wool Catholic who is willing to stand up for her beliefs despite anything that's been thrown at her, and yet she sees herself as a constitutional originalist. She will not deploy her religious views to the sense that it will deprive the American people of liberties that they are to enjoy under the Constitution. So we see this interesting battle between religion and politics, and I will just conclude speaking about Roe v. Wade and how important it is for us Catholics to understand how much of a life-changing decision that is, a world-changing decision. That incidentally, Ruth Bader Ginsburg had a lot negative to say against. She was not a fan of the decision, so to speak, because of the way that it employed judicial activism and a lack of science at the time. So yes, I'll wrap up by saying that it is not a decision that is considered by legal academics in the United States to be what is known as super precedent. It is not a unrepealable decision, unlike Brown and the Board of Education and a few select others that are considered as so fundamentally agreed upon. The reason that Roe v. Wade is not considered a super precedent is because it's always had opposition, and it's always sustained opposition, and there's always been lively debate surrounding it. So it will be a real bone of contention for the Supreme Court going ahead, and I think it will be the biggest intertwining of faith and politics that we have seen for the past 20 or so years, I have to say. So that's my piece on the matter. I think that religion and politics in the US are becoming increasingly and unarguably intertwined. So we have to see what will happen.
Connor.
Yes.
How you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. I have to say, Charlie's probably said all the good stuff, but I'll see what I can. I'll see what I can add. I agree. I think that there's a problem. I think that's a little bit deeper in the United States than just. I don't know what it's deeper than, but that was a bad way to phrase that sentence. But we've got a problem in the United States where we have our country was built on different ideas, or rather the bringing benefit out of the conflict of ideas. We set up our system to be robust when ideas had to be conflicted and overturned and changed. However, what we didn't, and I don't know if you can build a structure against that, but we didn't build a structure that's robust against people disliking the structure, right? In order to maintain the structure, you have to have a bunch of people who are bought into the idea that holding different ideas is a good thing. Now, on a strict theological level, I mean, that's obviously there's a lot of room for debate on where free speech should have limits and where it shouldn't, and how free should the practice of different religion be, things like this. I mean, I do think that the American system, properly understood, is pretty theologically robust and holds up in a deep examination of the ethics. But so where am I going? I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought there. So problem being that I think that we have people who disagree so radically on some things that the differences may be irreconcilable, at least irreconcilable without the opportunity to actually sit down with people who you disagree with and hash things out, right? I think that there is a problem that's comprised of, or is composed of rather, a lot of people not being able to fathom what the other side is thinking about a set of issues, and they tend to be codified into left and right issues rather than individually thought out issues. And once you get to the point where you think, I can't understand how they think about all of these issues, you start to forget that they're human beings, I think, right? And that closes down the opportunity for discussion and for actual productive debate. And when that happens, you feel a lot more justified in cutting across the law to get at the devil, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that when you have embraced a number of the talking points that let's say make up the liberal ethos, at least in the United States right now, when you've embraced a number of these talking points, whether they be LGBTQ rights or abortion rights or being anti-racist, again, not saying that there's anything wrong with that at all in and of itself, but when you embrace that as your moral code and you see other people as somewhat being in conflict with that essential moral code of yours, you start to become willing to basically religion. When you have an ethics that will supplant religion, I think that religion. This is how I'm bringing it all full circle. I think that religion becomes a tolerable hobby as long as it doesn't get in anyone's way, right? And I think that a number of prominent and active Catholics in the United States, like the ones we were just talking about, Joe Biden, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that for them, regardless of how they personally believe, because you never really know with a politician, but that at least in terms of public life, their religion is a nice hobby, a nice thing that they may do on Sunday mornings. I know Joe Biden does, but whether or not AOC does, I don't know. But it has become, instead of a worldview that, to Tom's point, the four ends that kind of define your response to any situation and determine your goals, it's become a hobby, a nice thing to do, a way to get together with people, a way to, for example, connect with your culture, especially if you are Latinx. But I think that religion as a world-informing worldview, as a global worldview, has been more or less thoroughly rejected by the left, and you start to see that by some of the questions and some of the critiques that you got of Amy Coney Barrett when she was going through this whole process. That many Democrats, to their credit, restrained themselves from critique of religion, but it didn't entirely. It was still there in many cases, just perhaps slightly more veiled. So I guess to sum up my thoughts on it, I think that we're so pluralist in the United States that we've allowed people to kind of disconnect with people who disagree with them, which allows for the vilification of religion if religion is taken seriously. And I think that you compound that with the fact that the United States has always been, suspicious of Catholicism. There's never been a time when it was it's always been a slightly outsider, slightly weird sort of a religion in the United States. And so you combine those two things and you end up with, I think, with a lot of public Catholics who will say that they're Catholic, but otherwise don't really let their faith or their worldview, actually, if they believe in their faith, they don't let their worldview affect their actions, which is kind of a strange place to be and very confusing, I think, for many Catholics on the ground.
Yes, yeah. If you don't mind, Tom, I might just interject something just to add on to that as well. Talking about, because you touched on a very interesting idea, Connor, about the idea that there is this developing philosophy that is, yet again, like religion was, it's beyond political tribe. It exists over and above the political division, but it's a new way of carrying oneself, if that makes sense. It's almost an accepting view that it's okay to vilify the person who is of a different political view to you, that they are somehow less than human. Which is what the opposite of the religious Catholic Christian worldview teaches, that regardless of political tribe, you are of one image, that you are of God's image. That this idea has disappeared from our society, and in that sense, that it has become acceptable to only speak with those in your tribe. That it has become acceptable not to broach the difficult concepts that may touch upon the very humanity of your person. That I think abortion is the perfect example. That you see the animosity with which the abortion debate is argued. That it's almost that the pro, if we're to slap on labels, the pro-choice see the pro-lifers as less than human. That they are almost rights dissolving kind of aliens that don't belong in civilized society. And sometimes you see that on the other side as well, where the pro-life dehumanize the pro-choices. And you see this sort of new ethical system where it's acceptable to see the other side as less than human. So I think you touched on that really well. And I think it's a very interesting point. And I think it really does speak to the political situation in the United States at the moment.
Mm. But we're also finding ourselves in these situations because take Catholicism for the example, because it's what we believe to be true and it's our religion. It deals in moral absolutes, whereas if you contrast that with the democratic system that underpins all modern democracies, but was really the brainchild of the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence, the founding of the United States. This would be, something to possibly discuss another time, but I think it's highly relevant. It is founded on very much liberal tenets, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, where what has been interesting is that endured over a very long period of time, and it allowed, Catholicism did flourish in the United States, even though it was always looked on suspiciously, and Protestantism was, really the lifeblood of the United States. Catholicism has managed to flourish, whereas what we seem to be seeing now, to my mind, is the necessary consequence of those founding platforms, the liberalism. Whereas if there are no moral absolutes, and that's what you accept as a matter of fact when you engage in really the modern concept of democratic dialogue, freedom to believe whatever anybody wants to believe, then moral absolutes lose their authority, lose their force, lose their meaning. And therefore, anybody has the right, if they hold the big enough stick, to suppress anything that claims to have moral absolutes. And that seems to be what we're finding in modern society today, whether you're in Australia. I personally think the inadvertent or the indirect persecution of religion in Australia is one of the most concerning things, because people just don't see it. Australia is a very skeptical, very secular country, but that is seen to be completely okay. In America, everything is drummed up and dramatized a lot more, so we really, really see things over there. A very literal depiction. But to my mind, the chaos and the conflict that we're seeing sort of across the world today is that the necessary consequence of living in political systems that really suppress the ability or suppress the existence of moral absolutes and truth, call it truth, because that's what we believe as Catholics. What are your thoughts on that one? Let's go, Charlie.
Absolutely. You see, you touch on the idea of moral absolute. Sorry, Connor. Yes, yeah. Did you want to say something, or are you all good?
No, I just said that was funny because you said absolutely.
Oh.
I apologize.
Relatively, I should say. No, indeed. Thinking about the idea that who in the United States has the moral arbiter power in the world, so that in the sense that the setup of the US Constitution, in a sense, it has everyone's corner, that there is no one philosophy that is left by the wayside, that you are all given an equal position to start from, and that you must defend that position through sheer logical power alone. It is a unique archetype of English liberalism, which is one of the core influences of the American Constitution. The founding fathers, much to the dismay of many Americans, were indeed Englishmen and had a very English upbringing prior to the the separation from from the fledgling British Empire. So they were English liberals at heart, but they just they engaged in a rebranding exercise to dilute centuries of important history down to a few sentences. But yes, you have to wonder how a moral consensus emerges in the United States. And I don't think many would question the fact that it is in a moral sense, a Christian country. It takes its sense of right and wrong from the Christian Gospels and uh, the relevant scripture and the
At least
moral.
indirectly, yeah.
Absolutely. Perhaps it's been given a sort of self-sustaining independent source by the Constitution, but many would say that the philosophies that governed the creation of that Constitution came from John Locke, who considered himself a Christian, and many of these 17th century philosophers undoubtedly bore upon the minds of the founding fathers when they wrote the Federalist Papers, which I would say to any American listeners are some of the greatest pieces of writing that actually exist
They're
in
wonderful. I
the
would
English
not
language.
want to live the life of Alexander Hamilton, but boy, the guy could write. I'll tell you that.
Incredible.
I want to second everything you guys just said.
I think they should still be mandatory in American schools because they give you such a
Yeah,
logical basis of thought that they are just incredible. You understand the real founding tenets of your country after you finish reading that mammoth set of papers that that he wrote alongside the American Constitution. But yes, indeed. But it's things like that the sheer conviction of the founding fathers and their understanding of the world birthed a sort of moral objectivism in the United States that has governed it up until very recently. I think what you've seen, although recently, is definitely a explosion of relativism that has come out of if I can speak frankly, a lack of understanding of what actually birthed the United States. That I speak with my American friends all the time about this. That they learn very little of American history. They learn very little of the American Constitution, and therefore they are not learning the moral objectivism that birthed the United States. So that would be my to make an American my 2 cents on the issues.
well, I would actually follow up, but maybe make I would agree for the most part, but I would actually change your. I agree that we don't learn enough about American history or history in general, frankly, in the U.S. education system, in my experience. But I actually think that it's less an ignorance than it is a hatred of history that motivates some of these politics. It's an actual hatred of what came before because it came before, and it's kind of a strange phenomenon, and that's a whole different conversation. But does that make sense?
It
Yes,
does.
yeah.
Let's jump into this because Connor and I, unbeknownst to Charlie, we had a very interesting telephone conversation a couple of days ago where we somewhat briefly, but we touched on this issue and we were going, how is it that the left can find itself in these conflicting positions where not all that long ago, it was the left that was the champion of freedom of speech. And now it's the left that is persecuting your right to advocate for a position on Twitter, censoring your right to engage in political dialogue on social media. Not long ago, it was the left that was the champion of feminism, the radical feminism, the new feminism that brought about the sexual revolution and all that as we know it. And now it's the exact same left that persecutes you if you what was it that Amy Coney Barrett used? Was it sexual preference in the confirmation hearing? And Connor and I were kicking the ball around in terms of how can there be such a blatant contradiction, or is it that we're just not actually seeing the issue, and is it that the left just hates all things tradition? It's not the actual positions, but it's the underlying concept of if it came before, then it must go.
I I would jump on that straight away and say that it's hatred that, what in a similar fashion that sustained the founding fathers, a real conviction to see justice and freedom in the world. That what sustains leftists is the hatred of that idea, and the fact that they feel that they could see a world where they were in the driver's seat, so to speak, that they were the ones who issued the moral diktats, that they controlled the boundaries of what could be called freedom in their topsy-turvy world, that they are sustained by their hatred of, like what you said, Tom, what came before. That they feel that this is a sort of force that operates against every fiber of their being. So you have to understand that this is a very challenging thing to get your head around. That you have to understand what they hate, so to speak, and then you have to understand why they hate it. And I think it comes from an overriding sense to want to be in the moral driver's seat, so to speak, of not just the United States, but anywhere that they can get their fingers round.
So that's interesting. So your thought is that it's not so much a hatred of what came before as a desire for the power to make the moral diktats themselves, as opposed to receiving them from somebody else.
Precisely, I think they wish, almost in a Nietzschean sense, to will themselves to power, so to speak. That they have a sort of
Huh.
overwhelming moral drive to be in charge, and I think one of the biggest indicators of that is their overriding sense of wishing to be so moralistic that you see much of their politics, so to speak, stems from a wish to dictate the morals of society to others, or what they feel should be the morals of society to others. And that's where they have their biggest levers of control, that they are the moral dictators as we understand them today, and they certainly are in terms of the things that we were once allowed to discuss openly and are now taboo. The sexual preference thing is the most recent and poignant example, I would say.
And it is interesting, just to carry on your point, Charlie, that it always seems to be the left that are the creators of those conversations, and they test the boundaries and they introduce the new radical thoughts that tomorrow will be the status quo, and they're always pushing and pushing and pushing. And it makes so much sense what you say, because then the inconsistency that we previously referred to, it's almost like there was just the wrong perspective. There is no inconsistency because there was never meant to be a consistency. It's the continual driving force of progress to pander to human nature without God, which is what we have today. We killed God relatively successfully, and we're suffering the consequences of it. And just to be completely fair, because we're talking about America as the case in point, because that's where all the political activity is going on at the moment. But these are symptoms that are observable all over the world. I think they're very observable in Australia. Charlie, you may say they're observable in the UK. Europe is a basket case. Any country that really derives its underlying philosophy from Western thought, once upon a time was the bulwark of culture, is suffering from all these issues. And a place where I've always thought this is quite confusing is in the judicial system, where the judicial system is meant to be, if there was ever a forum for objectivity and impartiality, it's the judicial system. But where that immediately becomes problematic is because the law, really at the end of the day, is applied philosophy. And the minute you step into a democratic forum, you have the application of mutually exclusive philosophies, depending on the factual matrix at hand or the law you're interpreting. And once again, then we can get into a discussion of activist judicial interpretation as opposed to black letter interpretation. Approaching these issues from completely different radical standpoints, conservative judges, progressive judges. I mean, imagine that you're going before a body to plead a case to get an objective ruling, and you're having to have the conversation beforehand. Now, this one's the conservative, this one's the Catholic, this one's the liberal, this one's the aggressive feminist. And that is the world we live in. And how can there be any sort of meaningful discussion? It all becomes really sophistry. It becomes sophistry because the underlying reality of truth has been completely removed. The whole premise of that conversation is that truth is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
So this is definitely depressing, but fairly accurate, I think. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to run to hop on my plane real quick. But
just quickly, where are you going?
One thing that Atlanta. I was called in for a work meeting at the last minute. So
incredible.
Hopefully, I can get some good barbecue while I'm down there at least.
I do hope so.
Fingers crossed. But last thing, Charlie, you said something very interesting when you were talking about the grab for moral power, I suppose. It struck me as when you decide that you want to put yourself in the position of moral dictator as opposed to someone who receives, understands, and abides by a law that's greater than you, that is actually, I think, in a technical sense, a demonic attitude. And what I mean by that is exactly, in theory, what the law of the angels or the fall of the angels was supposed to be back in, at least according to tradition, right?
Absolutely.
Is setting yourself in that place. And so basically what it is it's like Animal Farm, but taken a step further as well. I just more equal than you kept on bouncing around in my head while you were talking about that. But then I realized the point that you're making is it's not just in service of gaining extra political power. It's actually in service of setting yourself in the position of moral power, which is actually incredibly more disturbing. Basically, Orwell didn't go far enough. And I think
undoubtedly
that's fascinating and terrifying, but fascinating. And also it makes me wonder if maybe we've got it too good in our modern society, if we feel like there's something about, well, you know what, this is a whole nother conversation, but I have a feeling that something about hardship puts you in a position where you understand that you are not in charge and you at least have to face the realities of the world. It's almost like we've cushioned ourselves enough in at least a number of modern Western societies that perhaps we've just allowed ourselves to get to this point where we do feel like we can dictate the fundamental laws. And that maybe we need a good slap in the face.
Absolutely. I think you're touching on something that's a very, very interesting subject that is it the harsh reminders of the world around us that leaves us brutally aware of the fact that we are not in charge of our own moral code, that we simply receive the moral code and we understand it and we interpret it as best that we can, but undoubtedly we are servants of it and it is not the servants of us. I think that is one of the most profound questions that has reaches back almost to the ancient Greeks in terms of their Platonic forms and all sorts. That's a real question of human existence, and I think that would be a fantastic conversation to have. Brilliant.
Well, and with that being said, I want to echo what you just said. I could go on with this conversation with you gentlemen for hours, without a doubt. Unfortunately, my duty calls me, so I must go save the wood poles upon which the U.S. infrastructure rests. The U.S. power infrastructure rests. It's somewhat less lofty, but someone's got to put those chemicals on those poles. So,
Connor, thank you so much for joining us, and I really look forward to the next time you can, and we might even be able to see your wonderful face.
Thank you.
Absolutely, yes.
I look forward to it myself. Thank you so much for having me.
Really appreciate it. Get out of here. Go save the world.
Great to talk with you, Connor. Right. Take care.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Well, that was really interesting, Charlie. So maybe if we can just have some closing remarks, because what I find so interesting about those sorts of conversations is in the political environment in which we live today, the default position is to have those conversations in terms of left, right, conservative, progressive.
Absolutely.
But really, as Catholics, it simplifies the whole conversation in terms of a dialogue, which is either Catholic or non-Catholic. And I think if all Catholics understood that, the conversation would become easier, the moral decision-making would become easier, and the resolution of these problems, albeit that they would not become easier, it would become simpler.
The temptation is always, I think, Tom, when you get so involved with politics, you sometimes forget that politics is worldly, isn't it? It's of the world. It's not in any way transcendental. It involves humans. It's made by humans, and it will rest on Judgment Day with humans. So as a very stark reminder to many Catholics listening, that the best way to stay sane in this world is to hold true to your faith and to really, really cultivate it as best that you can. That it's your rock, it's your bulwark, and it's your fortress in this increasingly mad world. So, especially to American Catholics out there who are feeling so what's the word? Lost at sea when it comes to the politics at the moment, that it's all transient, and it certainly doesn't bear upon the next life. So
yeah, because going back to a comment you made a long time ago, we are seeing this mix of religion and politics more prevalently today, even in terms of the hot political issues, whether it was not all that long ago. The legislation for same-sex marriage or abortion, these issues that are being continually pushed. And the resolution of these issues for Catholics is to simply understand that there is no conflict between politics and religion. Religion is at its core political, because the minute you accept the tenets of Catholicism, you have laid out before you your political, your social, all your duties, your worldview, and your underpinning infrastructure is there for you. So the simple solution is, if you identify a conflict, something is wrong. You don't understand your Catholicism.
Indeed, you set something in stone, and after that, the only question is the means to get there. That's the only question that's left to you, and that's where there is some room for manoeuvre amongst Catholics, that maybe you're more left-leaning economically in a very broad sense, that you're more right-leaning, you find yourself in the middle, that you don't burden yourself with economic questions, that you find yourself embroiled with politics all the time, that your faith can lead you in most wonderful places, but it can also be your refuge to hide away from the world. And believe me, I've wanted to do that one or two times before. So especially when faith doesn't quite align with politics in the modern world, that
100%.
It's a great place to hide away from the increasingly manic realities of the world. So
yeah, couldn't agree more. And that really leads us into a conversation about evangelization and being apostolic, which is of absolute necessity for Catholics. But we don't want to go too far down that track, because that is a conversation we will definitely be having another time. So that was riveting. Really enjoyed that. I think that worked well.
Brilliant. Yes, absolutely, Tom. That was really, really interesting. I think we started off talking about Trump, and we found ourselves in a world that shows there's far deeper questions than which who's going to be your president in November. So
huge. To borrow the words of the wonderful English, it was a stonker.
Stonker, absolutely.
Absolute stonker.
Knocked for six. There's another one. Yeah.
God love it. Charlie, thanks so much for joining, and I'll let you go, and I really look forward to doing this again with you soon.
Absolutely, Tom. You take care of yourself. Thank you.
I will. You too.